welcome back to more transfer talk, of course, on the Copper Club podcast. And I'm joined by Peter Pankovski. Peter, how are we doing, mate?
Good, Nate. Thanks for having me back on. It's a pleasure always. And you?
Yeah, I'm very good. Yeah. Do you know what guests normally don't ask me? We should probably start introducing that, shouldn't we? But speaking of guests, if we're going to be talking around a few transfer links, especially out of Brazil, and especially to Chelsea or Blueco, of course, I had to welcome back Jessica Frota to the podcast. Jess, how are we?
We're doing great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No worries at all. Look, we're going to kickstart this mini extra bonus podcast. I'm going to dive straight into a few transfer rumours. Peter, I'm going to come to you straight away because I know you're going to be very excited as Chelsea. I think it's a rumoured fee of around 17 million. I think there's a few things going on. I'm not 100% sure. But Boca Juniors, 19-year-old Aaron Anselmino is on his way to Stamford Bridge alongside 50 other players. No, I'm only joking. He's coming across to Stamford Bridge. A very small sample size to go on when it comes to Anselmino. He's only played less than 10 senior games. He's already scored a crucial goal in the Sudamericana. But what can you tell us or tell our audience about him? And away from the Chelsea fit, let's focus on his profile to begin with, because I know everyone's always going to have that discussion with where's he going to fit in at Chelsea? Chelsea signing everyone. Let's just park that for the time being. And let's talk about what looks to be a really promising young Argentine centre-back.
Well, you said excited. I'm honestly not that excited, really, if I have to be honest. Not because of anything. You said ignored the Chelsea fit, but I feel that you mentioned it already. The small sample size kind of takes me a little bit by surprise as to the price given.
Mm-hmm.
The 17 million pounds in today's football may not be a lot considering the prices given for some of the players that have been coming and going on the transfer market, but still, you said it best. I think he has about 11 total appearances with Boca senior side, which is not a lot. Don't get me wrong. He has been impressive. I think especially his on-ball ability has been somewhat of a joy to watch when you consider he's a centre-back. He's not a midfielder. He's not someone he's used to getting on the ball a lot. But again, that's not his main role. His main role is to defend. And it's kind of one where this is not a direct comparison, but reminds me a bit of Javier Mbuyamba, I think it was, who came from Barcelona a couple of years ago to Chelsea, and a lot of people kind of said, "Oh, he's the next Van Dijk because he was Dutch." Profile kind of comparison was there, and I kind of understood it, but it's one where people, and especially I feel from Chelsea's perspective, it's kind of jumping the gun. Again, yes, he has shown a lot of promise. I think when you consider raw tools there and just stature and everything, he looks a fantastic prospect. But it's one where just the price in itself kind of makes me question the certainty of, be it the scouts, the transfer department or whatever. Sorry, the analytical department or whatever has decided to go on off. It's why I kind of hold back my excitement, if you can tell.
Yeah, I think it's easy for Chelsea fans to get excited after Esteval, Kendry Pires, who are proven, okay, and we've seen them play a lot more. And obviously, look, Chelsea fans are getting excited every week, every time Esteval steps onto a pitch because of what he's doing. So I think when Chelsea sign these South American youngsters, they're almost putting them in the same category where that's not necessarily the case. I'm surprised by your negative view there, Peter, because yes, it is a small sample size, but I think sometimes you can just tell when a player has something about them. And I really like how confident he is in bringing the ball out, almost stopping, waiting for a striker to make his decision, moving the ball out from the back. He can spray a pass. His reading of the game for his age, I think, is exceptional, to be honest with you. I like it. I like what I've seen in terms of how he sometimes can be a bit rash, but he's rash when he knows that he can win the ball, and maybe he's trying to sort of win over La Boca's crowd in his early stages. But Manchester United were very interested when he'd only played 2 or 3 games. So I'm sure that it wasn't just Man United and Chelsea. I'm sure other big clubs were interested in him. And when I see that it's not a clickbaity article, I'm very intrigued by the player profile. And if I am to draw a comparison, which I hate doing, and I'm not saying it is at all, but the way in which we saw Murillo bring the ball out from the back, with such sort of confidence and calmness is what sort of has stuck out to me. So yes, I'm in the same camp as you. He has a small sample size and it's easy to get carried away. But Jess, hopefully you can bring a bit more positivity to the chat around our first player.
Yeah, I think I actually am more positive than Peter, but maybe not as positive as you. Just because
Okay.
I think no, it's just because when I look at Chelsea, if you're talking about Blueco and Chelsea, there's obviously this great investment in South American players that we've seen with Blueco since the takeover, and it's not always clear when a player is gonna it's going to count as a Chelsea player or a Strasbourg player or someone that they're just looking to invest in terms of financials. So I have a lot of questions about where does he fit in all of that? What's the idea behind the signing? Because obviously when you look at players like Stevan or like Kendry Paez, you're looking at the very, very top, the gems, and those are the ones that you have to be sure that they're investments for Chelsea and not for financials. Those are the type of players. And then you have a whole bracket of players that you're just not sure what it's going to be like. So if I had to bet, it would be a player that they see potential and they just want to see how he develops. And if he develops as they kind of envision, then great, then he can move to Chelsea. And if not, you're going to try to sell him for profit. So I think like in that bracket, it's kind of hard to be excited as a Chelsea fan for someone that you're not even sure it's going to be part of the team. However, if you're talking about the player on its own, I actually quite like him. I know, as you mentioned, both of you, the sample size is not great. Turns around like 10 senior appearances, and I think 5 of those appearances were in 2023. So it's kind of hard to judge. But as you said, he has an intriguing profile. I think he has the fundamentals to be a top player. I apologize for my dog, by the way. She seems very excited.
He's welcome on the podcast.
Yeah, she seems very excited about something that's happening and might be open. So, but anyway, I think he
clearly
is
disagreeing with your thoughts about Anselmino.
Yeah,
clearly
100%. She's a huge fan of every South American player. But yeah, I do like his profile. I think he is a type of centre back that kind of fits what Chelsea. You see what Chelsea's trying to build in terms of ball playing centre back, someone that's fast, that can play. If you're talking about a high line in the back, he's someone that fits that. He adds a lot of height. You mentioned the goal that he scored in Sudamericana and how he's good in the air, loves to get on the ball. I think he's press resistant. I kind of agree that sometimes he has like a lapse in judgment, but I think it comes with maturity, with experience. And I think that's something that's going to get ironed out. But I do like that he's not someone that he's not looking to go immediately for the tackle. He prefers to close down, and I like his movement. I like how he is able to read the game and position himself. I think he is a very, very smart center back. So I'm just, as a football fan, I'm intrigued at his profile, and I think if he develops correctly, he can be a very, very nice player. And for Chelsea, for me, I'm just going to wait and see what the plan is, because ideally I think Chelsea already wanted to move him to Strasbourg for a year, but they couldn't find an agreement. So instead he's staying at Boca Juniors for the year. And for me, actually, I think that's the best case scenario, because I think he really needs to add that experience in an environment that he is settled in. He is gaining more game time, because when they changed managers, he kind of lost a little bit of that, and he had to pretty much earn his spot back in the starting 11. So yeah, as a Chelsea fan, I'm just intrigued to see how he develops. And we have a lot of center backs, so we're going to probably see some movement there as well. But yeah, I think he's a very, very intriguing, interesting profile.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I completely agree with you there. Staying at Boca, because sometimes, well, as we are now, we're seeing South American players move across to Europe and becoming Europeanized, if that's even a word. But that's what's happening with these players. So the longer they can almost stay there, for me, and add that and keep that culture element and build their game there, because that's where they've come from originally with the academy. So they're doing something right with them. and now they need to almost have at least a season or two of senior football. We're seeing that less and less, and that's me probably being selfish. But I am glad you've addressed that. We do have to bring in the Chelsea angle here, and I just don't want Strasbourg to become a dumping ground for not just South American players, but just top European players who are of the age of 17, 18, 19, and then seeing how they can potentially make a profit. Because yes, Bluco is obviously a business first and foremost, but it doesn't want to come across that way when it comes to players just going to Strasbourg. And you don't want to ruin Strasbourg either, with obviously they've got their own plans and their philosophy, and the last thing they want is 5-10 players turning up every season just to long-term benefit Chelsea. So, okay, mixed opinions on the first player, so we better focus on another who's ending up at Strasbourg, and that is Atletico Nacional's Oscar Perea. Peter, are you going to bring some positivity around Perea to the table?
Oh yeah, for him, absolutely, for him, absolutely.
Over
But
to you.
it's just, I know. First of all, for anybody who doesn't know, a little bit of propping from me, but you just plug into the Copper Club's article part and go and read Nathan's piece on Oscar Perea if you want to get to know him better. So that's number one. Number two, I love that piece. Number three, I think this is one of those deals that Bluco in general and a lot of the Chelsea fans have been kind of screaming about. I suspect even Strasbourg fans who have voiced their opinions on Bluco in general would be excited or should be excited for this one, I would say, because Oscar Perea, despite kind of the poor start to this year, I feel is one of the more exciting talents from South America that doesn't get recognized because he plays in Colombia, because he's not the mainstream media darling, which is, and this is not a knock on Kendry Páez, but kind of Kendry Páez has garnished all the headlines, Estival has garnished all the headlines, Endrick and so on and others, whereas Oscar Perea is kind of back in the limelight. He's one of those players that he puts in fantastic shifts week in, week out, especially from the left wing position. He's a dynamic dribbler, very direct, consistently looking to get on the ball, try and create something out of nothing. And that's a host of traits that you'd ideally want from your attacking player. And of course, people will point out and say, okay, maybe he's been poor this year. And I do tend to somewhat agree. I don't think he's been as poor as described, but we know how South Americans are. They always go from one end to the other really quick. Sorry, Jess. But even if that's the case, we still forget that this is a player who made his debut season at 18, meaning kind of his first real senior season was at 18. I think he's going to have about 40 plus appearances. He's had 2 assists in was it Libertadores? I think it was in the Libertadores in the semi-final.
From my note, I'm not sure about that, but from my notes, 35 senior appearances last season, so he's building on that. So he's into his 40s, 50s already, which is refreshing. Like we've just been talking about for the previous 10 minutes, how players are getting less than 10 before. But the fact that he's in Colombia means that he's actually getting a good couple of seasons behind him. And sorry to interrupt here, but if he's having like a negative sort of start to the season, is that necessarily on his talent? Is it more to do with the team? Is it more to do with the structure there? I sometimes feel like players can be viewed a bit more critically just because of the environment, because we get excited about somebody, and then if they're having a poor season with the team, then is it actually the player, etc., etc.? And I'm of the same opinion of you. He actually made it into issue 3 for the top 10 players to keep an eye on across 2024. So whoever pieced that together has done pretty well. But look, back to you, Peter. I've stole the microphone off you.
No, I'm not trying to keep this too long. I'm really excited because it's a small, shrewd deal, one of those that you adore. From if someone will point it out and say that's the type of deal, say Brighton do, for example, and maybe not a Brighton, but still someone of that caliber. Sorry to Brighton fans or any Brighton fans listening, but some team from the lower to mid-table sides in England or in France or whatnot, he absolutely explodes in the European stage after settling in, and then in 12 months time, maybe 18, every single or the more bigger clubs start looking at him, and you get quoted a price of at least 30 million. So that's the type of talent you're looking at. And it's why it's a shrewd move from Bluco, because I feel they did need a left wing at Strasbourg. If say Angelo Gabriel gets loaned out again on the right side, that would be a nice pairing there. And he signed directly from Chelsea, so they don't limit themselves in terms of loan spots or whatnot. So in terms of stylistic and both tactical fit, I feel he's great. Like that's that's the sort of deal you make. And as you've pointed out, he's one of those that you definitely need to keep an eye on, because it kind of reminds me of the Julian Enciso deal to Brighton, honestly. Yes, he was a slightly bigger talent in Paraguay, but still, it's one of those that if you look on the surface of it, you're like, who's that? And then if you actually look into it, you're like, how is this guy not being picked up by someone even maybe bigger? And it's this sort of scouting / analytical approach that you would want at any club potentially when it comes to scouting those types of deals, especially in the multi-club model one.
Yeah, do you know what? Do you know why he might not have been picked up? Because if you look at the modern game, and this is maybe me sounding really old here, but if you look at the modern game, wingers aren't really taught now to get at players. Okay, everyone's sort of in their own zone, having to work it back, fiddly little balls into the box before you can even shoot. I think that's probably where the Euros has been a bit refreshing, because we've actually seen some long-range efforts. But with Oscar Perea's profile, he actually likes to get at his fullback, but not doing anything too fancy. He's a little bit robust, but because of his size, he's almost able to gallop through because he has a long stride, uses his body. But he comes into the middle as well. He doesn't just go, right, well, I'm right-footed on the left wing, I'm going to cut in and try and shoot from here all the time. He's happy to operate centrally, and it's quite refreshing to see. Hopefully that is a sort of allowed to happen at Strasbourg, rather than being penciled into a position where he's not allowed to beat his man, because that's when you are changing who a player is. And yeah, similar to Enciso there, when he was at Libertad, he was unreal and it was just explosive. And that's the sort of same thing we are seeing with Perea. I think that's a really good comparison you've drawn. One I should have thought of and didn't put in my notes. But it's quite nice to see somebody just get at a player and having that sort of mentality, rather than just having to turn back, which we're seeing time and time again at big clubs. Hopefully that ends when Pep Guardiola finally moves out of football. But until then, we will have to wait and see. But another exciting player, another one who has been linked. We'll move across now. Another one who has been linked with Chelsea. I don't know how true that is, but I'm just trying to keep the trend going. But in recent times, has been linked with West Ham. Fenerbahce came about over the weekend. Again, Turkish links, and sometimes never here or there. But that is Corinthians Wesley, another really exciting winger, and perhaps a similar profile to Perea in terms of how he likes to just get at a fullback rather than muddling about with skills and stuff like that. But we're not really seeing that, because if anyone's looked at the Brazilian table of late, Corinthians are in a little crisis of their own, if I'm going to put it delicately, which is perhaps why Wesley will make a move this summer. And now there have been quotes around 20, 30 million. I think that's Corinthians reaching, to be honest, because they are desperate for funds. But we've seen Carlos Miguel and Maria obviously go to Forest for around 4 million and 13 million. So probably a more realistic fee, if I was to guess, would be around the 15 million mark. But another really exciting profile out of Corinthians. They can't afford to lose him, but they likely will. Jess, I know he's not the next Esteval. We spoke about this off the podcast on a previous one, because Chelsea fans, again, were getting very excited when the link came about. He's not in the same standard of Kendry Pires and Esteval, but that doesn't mean we can't get excited about him, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you have to be clear. He is not considered like the first bracket of talent in Brazil, as you mentioned. Estevão clearly is, but he's still a very good player. And so when I look at him, I can analyze him from two different perspectives. One is as a Brazilian fan and a fan of football, and just looking at the player. And I think I can give a much more objective and maybe fair assessment, as opposed to the Chelsea view of things, or, is Chelsea looking to find the player? So, as a player, I like his profile quite a lot, because he's someone that likes to dribble, but as you mentioned, much more direct. He uses his physicality. It's not about the flair. It's about body feints and long passes, short passes, and beating his opponent with his body. It's just nice to see. I usually, there's exceptions, of course, there are exceptions. Estevão is one, but I usually prefer this type of player, the one that's very physical. And if you mention him being linked with West Ham, I think physically he is ready to move to a Premier League, let's say. I think he's 180, he is 19, I think he's strong. What I think he needs to improve his game is pretty much like his numbers are quite modest. I think he has 35 senior appearances and only like 5 goals, maybe 3 assists. So it's something that he's building on, but I think he needs to work on that. And there's a quote, I think it's from Renato Augusto, I'm not sure, not 100% sure, but I think when a quote from him talking to Wesley saying, as an attacker, as a winger, a forward, you need to add those numbers up. And it's something that I know that he's been working on, but it needs to increase because, as I mentioned, they're quite modest. But he is a style that is very, very interesting, and I can see him doing well in Europe. When it comes to the Chelsea aspect, I'm not saying I'm confused because I think he kind of fits the mold of what Chelsea are reportedly after in terms of a left winger that almost can play as a supportive kind of striker. He can do that. But as you mentioned, I think he is still kind of raw and not ready yet to make that quite of a jump in terms of someone that you would look to be part of the first team. He is not also someone, because of the Strasbourg, and you mentioned about Oscar Perea, is not like Chelsea are going to buy him and loan him to Strasbourg. They already got their left wing, and I'm quite happy with that. And it's one thing that I am quite satisfied as a Chelsea fan is that often we see, as you mentioned before, players being bought and you don't know where, are we buying them to loan them out? And I think that can be very stressful as well if you're a Strasbourg fan, right? You don't know, we're just going to develop them for a year, what's going to happen. And so I think one aspect of the deal with Oscar is that it was bought directly by Strasbourg, even though it's, Blueco, there are no links, at least none direct links with Chelsea. And I think that's quite exciting. But it's not someone that Chelsea could buy to maybe, loan because there is no space for him at Strasbourg. So for me, it's not also, as we mentioned before, not a talent rated as highly as Devon that would warrant such a huge investment this early on. So I have a few questions about how well he would fit at Chelsea, what the plan would be with him. We also have some players in the academy that I think are worth investing in. So I have a few concerns when it comes to the link with Chelsea. But when you're talking about a player, the player on his own, he's one of the few that have been impressing this season in Brasileirão, as well as if you're talking about Nunes, for example, or other players, Matheus Pereira, so those sort of players that are kind of standing out from, and I think two aspects of his mentality, I think that kind of he brings forward. He's just so courageous. He's never afraid. And that can be such a huge difference maker, especially if you're playing right now in a side that is struggling, as you mentioned. And it's also paramount when you're talking about maybe moving to Europe. So he has that mentality, that strive, rage. He's not going to be intimidated by the opponent. And I think that's great.
Yeah, for sure. I think that when you say, and I think, look, anytime anyone's linked with a player and they don't know about them, they go straight to Wikipedia, look at appearances, goals and assists. And I think it is important to point out he has been playing in a poor side for quite some time now. Corinthians second bottom, I believe. And so they're finding it hard work, but there's parts of it I do like. So Corinthians played Palmeiras the other day and they completed 10 out of 13 dribbles, even though Corinthians lost 2-0, didn't really do too much in the game. Now Esteval completed 3 out of 7. So I'm not saying Wesley is better than Esteval, but it's quite interesting to see how Wesley approaches the game compared to Esteval. And especially in a poor team, Wesley's almost taking it upon his own shoulders to be like, okay, this is on me to drag the team up the pitch. And I'm capable of doing it. Yes, at the moment, I'm not getting as many goals or assists as I want. But operating in a team which aren't really, there's so many problems with Corinthians. That would be a podcast in itself. So we won't dive into that. And it's a shame, really, because I would like to see him stay for another season before potentially taking that mini jump, as we've spoken about, before going to a big club. Because my only concern would be is if we look at Matthias Flanker, who's moved across to Crystal Palace, he went across with maybe a few more games to his name, but still not knowing his best position or how far his trajectory is going to be. And he arrived with an injury to Crystal Palace and he's not been able to find his feet. So you've got Palace fans or Premier League fans automatically turning around saying that he's a flop and it was a waste of money and an investment. And I just wouldn't want that to be the same for Wesley, but keeping him in the same environment, I'm not sure is best for him either. So it's a bit of a catch-22 at the moment. Peter, what's your thoughts? You're Wesley. someone, you've got a few options, West Ham are interested, or another team in, say, Portugal, whatever, like, where do you think is the best move for him?
Well, I echo Jess's words because I don't think he's ready for such a big move when it comes to Chelsea, just because of the expectations, even though Chelsea have now kind of been a mid-table club for the good 2 years. I think in terms of talent alone, he's one that, as I said, he resembles Oscar Perea because he's a very direct player. He doesn't tend to take the flashy route. He wants to just beat his opponent, and shot ball helps him a lot. So when he beats his opponent, he's able to fire up an absolute missile, and that's always a good thing because as long as you have an attacker who can generate a lot of shots off the dribble, then you're likely to have someone very dangerous, whether it be just for goals itself or the rebounds, potentially ball knockabout in dangerous areas, deflections, and so on. A lot of these things tend to matter. However, as I said, I feel he's not ready for such a move. Physically, I wouldn't think he would last it. He's still kind of, yes, in Brazil, he's cutting it, but you said it. First of all, Corinthians are absolutely terrible right now, and they do rely a lot upon him. I'm not sure that would translate to someone like Chelsea. I think the West Ham fit was one where I could get excited about, and I still would have said he would need a settling period in because obviously they don't have a pure left winger right now. They kind of shift. I think it was Antonio, Pablo Fornals used to be shifted on the left wing, and so on and so on. So
And
that
they've
was
invested
one
in Gil Herme as well, so like they've
as
got their own
well.
mini projects there.
Yeah, and when you put that as well in, maybe they could have done both. To be honest, like Guilherme could play 10 and Wesley could play left wing, but that's still putting two players who are just now jumping from Brazil to the most physically demanding league in the world. And I don't think West Ham, for what it's worth, will risk that itself. Now, the Fenerbahce link, I think you mentioned it, and I think it's actually from a reliable source. Like, I have a mutual who is usually like Turkish, so he said that that's arguably the most reliable journalist from Turkey. Whether that happens, I wouldn't know. A lot of Brazilians do tend to use kind of Turkey, and they actually settle quite well to the environment there. And I would not hate that because he's still 18. He's going to turn 19, I believe, this year, if I'm not mistaken. I might be wrong here. Don't quote me.
He's 19, I think.
Yeah, and when you think about that, he's kind of, yes, okay, he's going to Turkey, and people will say, okay, he's going there for the money. It's like a Russian move. I wouldn't say so necessarily. We've seen a lot of players go to Turkey, and even if they perform well, they kind of do still get their moves. And maybe it's not the ideal trajectory, but it would be one where he gets to develop in Europe before actually making the move. He starts playing European competitions, adjusting to that tempo of the game, to traveling a lot from, obviously, Brazil still travels a lot. We know how big Brazil is, but it's one where like one day you might draw to get to play in Belarus, for example, and it's freezing cold, and then the next day you're back in Turkey. So it's that type of thing that I'm talking about, and I wouldn't hate it. Now, I wouldn't be the biggest fan, but I wouldn't hate it. It's just the profile in itself is one that he's worth investing in. He's one where is just such a dynamic rate of actual kind of attacking output on a consistent basis that you definitely would want to test it out and see how far it gets you. It's just that for himself, he has to pick the exact right environment that would make him take the next step. I don't think if he comes into Chelsea now, for example, with Sterling there, with Mudryk there, with Noni Madueke, Palmer, all the attacking talent that they have, and it's supposed to be even more with Kendry and Esteval coming next year, that they will prioritize his development to the same way that another club probably will. And that's where I think Wesley should be sitting at.
Yeah, if he moves to Turkey, it's almost on him to be able to show what he's about and take his game to the next level. I think there's just such a demand in transfer windows in 2024 to, well, he's shown a good highlight reel or he's played really well in one game, so we must invest in him and bring him over to the Premier League now. And almost that ruins the player. So the fact that there is that opportunity for him to go to Turkey, whether that's true or not, I always think like it's a good bridge and a good sort of opportunity for the player to be like, I've made a sensible decision here where I'm going to play 25, 30 games a season, opportunity to maybe shine in Europa League or Europa Conference, which is now offering another scale, another opportunity for these players. And then within a year, like that is a high enough profile for them. They're already in Europe to then take that next step rather than when you are missing that step and moving across to a top 4, top 6 side and then you're getting limited minutes. Look at a completely random player who's just popped into my head is Valise, who's moved across to Spurs from Rosario. Like, he's taken that big jump, and I know he's had an injury or two, but then he went to Seville on loan, didn't really get game time there, and then like your career, like vital years, you can fizzle out a little bit. Jess, sorry, I know you wanted to say something.
No, I was just because I think Peter kept mentioning about making the right move, and it's almost like pretty much I know it's not random, but it becomes random in a sense because you have to have the right circumstances, and there are certain things that are out of your control. And for some reason, obviously, I think maybe it's because Peter is here and talking about it, and I can't not talk to Peter and not remember about Habitina. So, making his move to Russia, and he was so highly rated, and it was just maybe like the wrong move at the right time, or the wrong move at the wrong time. And I am scared about Wesley in that sense because of how Corinthians need to sell. And sometimes when you need to sell and you take as it comes, and I'm not sure, we have to wait and see about which clubs are going to come in for him and whether or not it's going to be the right fit. But as you said, I would much rather for him to stay on for at least the end of the season, playing, at Corinthians, developing his game, even though they are struggling, or at least somewhere in Brasileirão. That will be my personal choice. And yeah, I haven't seen any links to Portugal, but I think that would be actually unbelievable if a Portuguese club came in for him. So we just have to wait. But as a Brazilian fan, I am kind of concerned about his next move, but just hoping for the best.
Yeah, well said. We'll talk about one more player on this particular episode, and that is a player who has really taken his time moving across to Europe, and he's still not going to be there for another 6 months. And that is, of course, Thiago Almada, who has been linked to Europe many a times, stayed in the MLS, where last season, 33 appearances, 12 goals, 19 assists for Atlanta United. Incredible. I'm surprised. I don't know if there's been any other bids, to be honest with you, over the last few months. I'm surprised that no one really came in the last window for him. But John Textor is desperate for a title in Brazil. So although he's been signed long-term to go to Lyon, at first he's moving across to Botafogo, where the Libertadores is still up for grabs, the Brazilian title is still up for grabs, maybe a sideways move slightly up. I think Brazilian football is better than Argentinian league at the moment, but I think there was a lot of hype around him coming to Europe straight away, and it's been a while. He is 23 now, which was quite surprising. I thought he was a year or two younger than that. But he has the profile there to go and help Botafogo win the title. I think $23 million. Another record being broken by Botafogo within 6 months. Peter, they're not messing about here. And it was a move I put him together to hopefully be like a Morgan Gibbs-White replacement if he left Nottingham Forest as a sort of wish list. But he hasn't. He's moving across to Lyon long term. What do you think of that?
I mean, it goes to show what you're thinking about him when you say he could potentially move to the Premier League, and now he goes to Botafogo, does it not? So, I mean, I'm so shocked in terms of the actual volume of the transfer, because I would have never expected him even to agree to a move to wait for 6 months before moving to Lyon, because he's just that good. I remember Cal speaking very highly of him as well, talking about, I don't remember who he linked him to, but said, this guy, if he moves here and here, he's just so good. It's time he makes the jump. And I've obviously heard him, and I bought him like 5 times with Football Manager as well. But it's just, I'm so shocked by Botafogo. It's pleasant that it's not just Flamengo now buying the top tier talent in Brazil, and they're coming out as well the way they have, even though it's kind of overstacking and it has become a little boring if you look at Alan, Luis Enrique, all of these types of players. But Thiago Almada in himself is just a phenomenal talent. Like, I honestly don't know how. First of all, he's agreed to move to Lyon, because I feel like easily he could have went elsewhere. I suspect wages are involved, and I'm not saying everybody plays for money these days, so it's not a knock on him. I just suspect the wages are well placed for him to be happy in France. But it's just he's so good. I can't even put it into words how shocked I was when I read that like Botafogo might do this deal, and I was like, yeah, this is just not going to happen.
I didn't believe it.
Something's going to happen. They're just going to be linked to it. It's a bit of a PR move. They're going to say, okay, we tried for Thiago Almada because we're ambitious. We do this, and then I log on fogal.net, which is like the best source for Botafogo news, just to see if this is legit. Like they've got an exclusive running about he's this close to joining medicals or booked for next week, whatnot. And I'm sitting here, Thiago Almada, you must be having me on. Like there's no chance. Now I see him posing with the shirt and everything, and it's just it all feels a little bit surreal and I think that's a testament to his ability alone, because with Luis Enrique there and the other players that we mentioned, that's one. But I feel he's even more of a ceiling raiser than those, because I feel he's just better than Luis Enrique, honestly. And
It's
even
a
though
statement
he's
signing for sure. It's a real statement.
even if he's played for in the MLS, like he just took that league by storm the moment he went in there, and I just want to see Botafogo like challenge for the title now. They just have to do it. They just on every front they have the depth. I'm sorry, just real quick, I'm finishing off. They have the depth. They have the star signings. They should be challenging here. Like that's you can't not do it. You just can't.
Yeah. Well, look, I said this on the Copa Libertadores preview that Botafogo were being dismissed. I didn't think they were going to sign Almada, but I knew they weren't done in the transfer market. But 31 goal contributions in 33 games last season was ridiculous, and he's not obviously lived up to the dizzy heights this campaign. And I did see that he was being slated by some like MLS journalists for not coming out and performing this season. I was thinking, well, if you are going to slate Thiago Almada, you don't deserve him in your league, and obviously he's on his way. Jess, we've obviously spoken quite heavily about Wesley taking a sensible route into Europe. Almada has taken a sensible route into Europe himself, hasn't he?
100%. Just before that, I was just saying I'm so excited as a Brazilian fan. I know you are as well, of someone that watches Brasileirão, just to watch him and see how he performs. And I'm just so excited. Just a personal note, it's something I'm very, very much looking forward to seeing how he does in Brazil. But yeah, as you mentioned, I think it's actually quite a good move. I follow transfers, and it looks like Turkey is leaving, right? Lyon. Sometimes he was linked with PSG, now he's linked with Dortmund. So for me, it's pretty clear that Almada is coming to be in the starting 11 for Lyon, and I think he'll do quite well in Lyon. Just how creative he is. You know, it's interesting when you have a player like him, where it's almost like you know what his best position is, but you also don't know because he plays so well in a number of different positions. You know, he's so creative, excellent on the ball. He's passing in the final third is superb, just so accurate. But he also knows how to move around in the box, and he's almost like a supporting forward where he comes in, great finisher. So I think that's a trademark of a very, very well-rounded forward, where you know he can be almost like a number 10. He can be on the wing, but he can also be almost like a second striker. You can play him anywhere and everywhere, and he's still going to be very successful. So I'm just very intrigued to see him in Europe. But first, I'm just going to sit back and enjoy and watching him play with Luis Enrique, with Chiquinho, and just see how he does. But very good, as you mentioned, 23 years old. He's still young, but not as young, not as someone who's developing, and you know, he's already on a different level of his development, in my opinion. So he's kind of beyond that phase where he needs to be playing week in and week out to develop. He's already shown us what he can do, and just about expressing himself. I think we talked about how courageous Wesley is, and I think Thiago, I'm not going to say courageous, but I just say confident. He's just so confident in what he can do, and it shows when he's playing. So I'm not going to pretend I watch MLS a lot, but I did watch a couple of things for him alone, and I watched him for the national teams and the unders and whatever. So I'm just very excited to be able to have the opportunity to watch him week in and week out in Brazil, and then see what he does in France. So yeah, as someone's like no link with my club whatsoever, I can just sit back and enjoy and just be happy.
I had to squeeze in a player at the end which wasn't remotely linked to Chelsea, so just so we can have an honest assessment right at the end. But look, we started this podcast rather negative. We finished it all rather excited about Thiago Almada, so it feels like a good place to leave it. But just before I sign off, I am buzzing to announce that issue 5 is now available to pre-order. So do get involved with that if you've liked any of our other previous issues, or you want to know more about Copa America or player profiles. Our very own Peter Pankovski has profiled Gabriel Moscada and he's moved to PSG. So over 80, 90 pages of bespoke South American content. We will have limited copies again, so do pre-order and secure yours today. But look, Peter, Jessica, thank you very much for your time and your insight. And I'm sure I'll be speaking to you both about Chelsea links and other players throughout the transfer window.